In 1963, a man in central Turkey took a sledgehammer to his basement wall. He wasn't looking for a lost civilization. He just wanted to expand his home. But what he found behind the plaster would rewrite the limits of ancient engineering. When the dust cleared, there was no dirt. There was a tunnel. And it didn't just lead to a dark cavern. It dropped straight down into the volcanic rock, opening into an 18-story subterranean metropolis, an entire city built completely out of the sun. It was engineered to hide 20,000 people, along with their livestock, their schools, and their chapels. But the deeper archaeologists climbed into the suffocating dark, the more unsettling the discoveries became. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a highly defensible fortress, sealed from the inside by 500-pound rolling stone doors, locking thousands of people in the earth. The architects who carved this abyss didn't just build a city, they built a survival mechanism against a threat that forced an entire society to vanish completely from the surface of the world. When local authorities arrived at the property in 1963, they assumed they were looking at an old root cellar. The homeowner led them down into his modern basement. He pointed to the ragged hole broken through the plaster and the absolute blackness beyond it. The first men to push their way through the breach had only basic flashlights. They stepped over the rubble and crossed the threshold into the void. Almost immediately, the geometry of the space proved this was no natural cave. The beams of their lights swept across straight corridors, intersecting at perfect right angles. Every surface was heavily scarred with ancient chisel marks. They were standing inside a deliberate, engineered grid. As they moved deeper, they found the first of many staircases carved directly into the bedrock. They began to follow the stone stairs downward, moving deeper into the volcanic tuff. Level after level, the network just kept going. They mapped living quarters hollowed out of the rock. They found communal kitchens with blackened ceilings from ancient fires. They walked through massive vaulted storage rooms, designed to hold tons of grain and supplies. The descent seemed bottomless. By the time they reached the lowest carved floor, they had climbed down 280 feet below the Turkish plateau. An 18-story vertical drop. At that extreme depth, in a sealed rock cavern with no natural light, the atmosphere should have been dead, toxic, unbreathable. But as the surveyors stood in the pitch blackness, they realized their lungs weren't burning. The air was inexplicably clear. It was moving through the deep corridors with a steady, calculated draft, pulled from a massive central lung they hadn't yet found. At 280 feet down, the carbon dioxide from 20,000 breathing bodies should have been lethal. There should have been nowhere for the smoke of their cooking fires to escape. But the architects of Derinkuyu had anticipated the physics of the deep earth. They didn't just dig a hole, they hollowed out an artificial lung. Surveyors mapping the city discovered massive vertical shafts, driven straight through the rock. The main ventilation shaft plunged more than 180 feet from the surface. It acted as a massive chimney, drawing fresh air down into the lowest levels, while venting the toxic exhaust up into the sky. But oxygen was only half the problem. To survive a prolonged siege, a city needs water. The surveyors found deep subterranean wells, driven right down to the water table, but they were intentionally engineered to never reach the surface. A deliberate defense, ensuring that an invading army above could never poison the supply. And the deeper the mapping teams pushed into the grid, the more sophisticated the infrastructure became. They found livestock pens isolated on the uppermost floors. Tethering rings were carved directly into the rock walls to hold the animals, keeping their waste away from the human population below. Deeper down, they mapped commercial wineries, pressing rooms, and even a massive cruciform chapel. This was not a temporary bunker. This was a permanent, fully functioning metropolis. But the sheer scale of the engineering raised a much darker question. To carve millions of cubic feet of rock without the entire system collapsing, required a staggering mastery of geology. Whoever hollowed out this mountain wasn't just a desperate group of refugees. They were master architects, with a profound reason to disappear. To hollow out a mountain without it collapsing requires a precise understanding of the rock itself. Derinkuyu was carved entirely into a geological formation known as volcanic tuff. It is a compressed ash-based stone, soft enough to scrape away with simple hand tools. But when the freshly exposed rock makes contact with the air, it oxidizes and hardens into a rigid shell. The ancient Phrygians likely started the first tunnels in the 8th century BC, and centuries later, early Christians pushed the grid even deeper into the earth. But the physical labor of carving 18 stories of solid rock is only half the mystery. Millions of cubic feet of stone had to be removed, and yet, surveyors found no mountains of rubble surrounding the entrance. Every cartload of excavated dirt had to be secretly carried away, scattered, and hidden in the landscape. They were going to extreme lengths to conceal the fact that this city even existed. And as archaeologists pushed into the defensive choke points, the true level of their paranoia became clear. At the end of a narrow, aggressively carved corridor sat a 500-pound circular stone disc. It was positioned perfectly in a carved slot, waiting to be rolled across the tunnel. This was not a city gate, it was a blast door. It was designed to seal the corridor completely. It locked from the inside, with a central stone pin, making it impossible to open from the outside. Whoever lived down here wasn't just hiding. They were preparing to be besieged by an army. In the 7th century, the Anatolian plateau became a war zone. The Byzantine and Arab armies were sweeping across the region, bringing endless waves of destruction. When an invasion force was spotted, signal fires were lit on the highest peaks of the plateau. That was the only warning the people of Derinkuyu had. They had minutes to gather their children, herd their livestock, and completely vanish into the earth. Once the population was below ground, the ultimate defensive mechanisms were triggered. The massive circular stone doors were rolled across the corridors, sealing the tunnels from the inside. But if an enemy somehow breached those outer gates, they faced the architecture itself. The connecting corridors were intentionally carved far too narrow to walk through upright. The ceiling dropped to just over 4 feet high. It forced any invading soldier to crouch in single file, completely exposed in the dark. It stripped a superior army of its numbers, allowing a single defender with a spear to hold off thousands. The entire surface of the region was abandoned to the invaders, and as the final stone doors locked into place, the refugees were left sitting in the suffocating dark. They could do nothing but wait, listening to the muffled footsteps of an army marching directly over their heads. The reality of a lockdown at Derinkuyu was not a brief emergency drill. Historical records suggest these sieges could last for months. With the heavy doors sealed, the sensory deprivation would have been absolute. There was no natural light to mark the passing of days or weeks. Because lamp oil generated smoke and depleted oxygen, it had to be heavily rationed. Archaeologists found hundreds of tiny, soot-stained niches carved into the walls. These small indentations held bowls of linseed oil, the only meager light source for 20,000 people. For the vast majority of their time underground, families lived, slept, and waited in pitch blackness. Their only connection to the outside world were the muffled vibrations of violence happening directly above them. But the strategy worked. When the Byzantine and Arab conflicts finally faded, the people of the underground city survived. They pulled the central pins, rolled back the heavy stone doors, and climbed the shafts back to the sun. Today, the surface of Cappadocia is quiet. The empires that drove them into the rock have long since turned to dust. But hundreds of feet below the sun, The long tunnels remain exactly as they were left. The massive stone doors still sit in their tracks. It stands in total silence, a chilling, permanent monument to the lengths human beings will go, simply to survive.